Thank you. Welcome everyone again. We have the zchir to have Professor Marc Shapiro with us in a series of shirim, now with 2 shirim. We'll expand on it another time. It's a pleasure to host you all. Everyone. And we did the introduction last time to Professor Shapiro, so we're going to pick up where we left off. Right now we're going to do a lecture on Qafiḥ.
Okay, great to be here. And just for those who were here last time, I just think it's interesting that between last week's class, 2 weeks ago, and now, the whole dispute had broken out about very relevant to what we spoke about, the shofars in Morocco. Yeah. And again, you have all these people saying as if they're slaughtering it like it's an offering to an idol, when again, it's like we, kill a turkey on Thanksgiving. They're not offering it to any idol or Muhammad. It just so happens it's a holiday. So what we spoke about 2 weeks ago are very relevant, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't know the Metzios. But today we're speaking about something else. We're speaking about the great figure of Rabbi Yosef Qafiḥ, so I'll tell you about him, his biography a bit, and then why I think he's so significant. But I want to begin with something. Now this time we have everything stapled together so you can find it very nicely. And it appeared in various places. I don't know why there's like Chinese writing on top of this, but there's a rabbi named Elitzur Siegel, and he wrote this post, and I'll translate it to how it begins. It's Harry Potter in the lands of the Dardaim, and I'll explain with the Dardaim in a minute, but I'll just translate it. He says, one Shabbos, one of my children asked me why they can't do magic like Harry Potter. I said to them, because your father is a Dardai. And what's that? It's one who you just get close to a magician, and immediately the magician loses all his powers to be a regular person. Now, I never read the Harry Potters. Maybe you did, so you'll get these references. But he says, even a great magician like Dumbledore, your father gets close to him, and he's just a regular person. If he looks at Hagrid, Shomer Akarkos, I don't know what he's in charge of. Groundskeeper. Okay, he's a nobody. Lord Voldemort, you don't say his name, him I heard of, he can't approach your father. And therefore it's not good to don't take Abba to a tiyul in England, because he just comes close to this Hogwarts school for magicians, and immediately this becomes a regular school like everyone else. And it's also dangerous, he says, because anyone who's playing Quidditch, right, they'll fall to the earth and they'll have to go to Madame Pompery's infirmary because she's going to lose all her powers also. So then the children asked, how can I do all those great things? And he says, I learned with Harav Hagadol Mori Yosef Qafiḥ. In Mari is how they called in Yemen, the great rabbis. And he taught me all these things. And the question is, can I learn them also? Bevadai. And therefore, all magicians, beware, because the Dardaim are coming. So what is this all about? This life of Rabbi Qafiḥ takes us from Yemen to Eretz Yisrael. In fact, he is the last really representative of this glorious tradition that goes back to the medieval period. His achievements are really incredible. He also stands out, I think, as really the only, what you would call Gadol B'Torah, Gadol B'Yisrael in a traditional sense, who was in our generation, even though he died 2000, including our generation, who was also respected in the academic world. I think the previous one, we've had figures like that, but not in his generation. You go back to Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, Rabbi David C. Hoffman. So, you have these figures, but I think in his generation, he was, I think, the only one, perhaps. And even after his passing, his followers have continued his path. There's a number of students that just came out. Rabbi Martin alerted me a couple of weeks ago to a new sefer. I was able to get it. He has a number of followers, or Vatzon Arusi, a number of others who follow in his path. Now, before talking about Rav Yosef, I have to tell you something about his grandfather. I didn't include a picture of Yosef. Anyone can go online, you can see what it looked like. But this is the famous picture of his grandfather, Rav Yichya Qafiḥ. And it's impossible to understand Rav Yosef without understanding something about his grandfather. In all of his Yosef Qafiḥ's writings, his grandfather is front and center. His grandfather really raised him, as I'll explain. And you could see the great respect, and everything he did, he sees as a continuation of his grandfather's approach. Now, if you go back to the medieval period, the Yemenite Jews, the scholars, they were great followers of the Rambam, both halachically and philosophically. And when they were being persecuted, we mentioned this last week, who did they turn to? The Rambam, the famous letter to Yemen he wrote. In fact, after the Rambam's death, we're told that they even added to their Kaddish his name. The Rambam became the final halachic authority in Yemen. Yet by the 17th century, things had changed. If anyone tells you today, for instance, that the Yemenites, they pass like the Rambam, it's not true. And hasn't been true for hundreds of years with this little group we're going to speak about, which didn't exist in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. New influences had entered Yemen by the 17th century. A number of people have written about this, even a whole book. I can't remember the author now on this, but I'm talking about Kabbalah. Classic Kabbalah, in particular the Ari, and it began to influence all aspects of Jewish life in Yemen.
Shabazi.
Everything, and in halacha, in prayers, in everything. The Maharitz, a very important halachic scholar in Yemen, Yichet Saleh, he has many volumes of halacha, and he produced a siddur that incorporated a lot of the Lurianic material. Well, he kept the Yemenite traditions as well, but this becomes very important. His siddur is today used by the Baladi Yemenites. That's one of the two major, they're the original, I guess you could say, Yemenites. It means native or indigenous. Another branch of the Yemenite Jews, they call them the Shami. Shami means the north, because they were influenced by, let's say, Eretz Yisrael, Syria. Their siddur and their tradition is even more Kabbalistically inclined, with a complete adoption of the Lurianic Kabbalistic ideas. In terms of halacha, even quite aside from any Kabbalistic influence, the Shami decided based upon the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch was very, very important. Rav Yichet Saleh, it's more the Rambam, and the Baladi is more the Rambam and Rav Yichet Saleh. And so we see that the old approach of deciding halacha based only on the Rambam had changed. By the 18th century, no one is deciding, 19th century, no one is deciding halacha just based on the Rambam. You have a Shulchan Aruch, or you have the Maritz, they call it, Yichet Salech. Now, both of these traditions, as I said, were influenced by Kabbalah, and it's an important part of Jewish learning. The reading of the Zohar became standard, even if people didn't understand it. It was a ritualistic thing, which I saw myself, by the way, many years ago when I was in Morocco. So it's not just in Yemen, but you have it throughout the Sephardic lands. Someone reading Zohar, and I'm certain he couldn't understand a word of it, but it's like people today will recite Tehillim, they don't understand it, they would read Zohar. Today, if you go to, I'll tell you something very strange now, if you go on my trip to Morocco, by the way, I'm going, God willing, in January, if we get enough people to sign up.
I'm considering joining.
A lot of people are afraid to go to the Arab countries now, but there hasn't been anything there going in Morocco. There's been things going on everywhere else. You read what just happened in England and France, whatever. So,
You're not worried? You're not worried? Morocco? Why not?
No, I won't be worried. I just said there's nothing going on in those countries. They have more problems in Canada and England and America. So, in the main shul in Casablanca, they don't just have an Aron Kodesh, they have a whole room. You walk in this room, and they have the Sifrei Torah. And by the way, the Sifrei Torah in Morocco, the Sifrei Torah are like our Sifrei Torah. They're not in a tick. Sometimes they have a tick, but I mean the classic way in Morocco, in Spain, was like our Sifrei Torah. But they have there, not just Sifrei Torah, on the side they have a bookcase, and they have Zohar there. So I think that's very interesting. It shows you how to this day they have it. It shows you how respected it is. Now, what I just described is how matters stood until the end, really the end of the 19th, really the beginning of the 20th century. It was then that a group of scholars, led by Rav Qafiḥ, began nothing less than a reform, with a small r, of Yemenite Jewry. Rav Qafiḥ was one of the great scholars in Yemen, in Sana. He served on the Beis Din. In fact, what's interesting, he served on the same Beis Din as the people who were going to be part of the great dispute with him. And he continued serving on the Beis Din during this dispute. But I think it's not the only time we've had people on the Batei Din who can't stand each other, but they have to be served together on a Beis Din. He even served for a short time as Chacham Bashi, which is the position, chief rabbi of Yemen. This is a position created by the Ottoman Empire. They had a Chacham Bashi in Turkey, in Constantinople, but they also had in other places where they ruled. The Chacham Bashi in Yemen was local. The one in Turkey had international authority. Now, Rav Qafiḥ's reforms were concerned with religion and education. So, for example, he opened up a Beit Midrash, a Beis Medrash, and the focus in his Beit Midrash was on Mishnah, including the Rambam's commentary, Talmud, Halacha. The other Beit Midrash, like I said, you had people studying Zohar there, and that was a major form of study. The study of Kabbalah was central to them. Rav Qafiḥ's followers revived the study of the medieval Jewish philosophers, which hadn't been studied in centuries upon centuries. 500-600 years maybe it hadn't been studied. I'm talking about Rav Sadia Gaon. I'm talking about Bachir and Pakuda. In the Arabic as well, in the writings of the Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim. Rav Yosef Qafiḥ describes in the introduction to one of his books how his grandfather and his followers, including the young Rav Yosef Qafiḥ, went to all the different genizot. There was genizot all over Yemen, and they found old texts of the Perush Mishnah and all sorts of other philosophical works that they rescued. And a number of them, Rav Qafiḥ himself would later publish from these that they rescued. After finding them, Rav Yechiya had his followers, including young Yosef, copy them because they were falling apart, the pages, and copy them. They were also able to get some, and they studied them from these actual texts that they found and they copied because they didn't have them otherwise. Not like today where they have all these things printed. They were able to get some printed copies of the Perush Mishnah, let's say from Germany. There was a fad that to get a PhD in Germany, what you would do is, PhDs are small writings, but they take one volume of the Mishnah, of the Perush Mishnah, Maseches Beitza, let's say, and you put out an edition of it based on a manuscript, because everyone knew that the Perush Mishnah that we have in the back of the Gemaras is not really reliable. So it became a thing. So each tractate, you have another scholar in Germany doing this. So they got some of those as well. This is education. What about religion? Rav Yechiya, he's known as Mari Hayashish. That's how they called him. He began, in line with this philosophical perspective, began speaking out against various superstitions that were popular in Yemen. And if you know Yemenite Jewry, all sorts of superstitions. They believed, evil spirits were lurking in every corner. And it's not just them. You have that in the Sephardic world as well. In fact, there was a big thing in the Sephardic world, there's a whole Sefer Tshuvos that deals with it in Syria, because people were actually giving, they were appeasing the demons, like with smoke and all sorts of things, which is Torah prohibitions. But you had similar sorts of things in Yemen, complete superstition, the evil eye, cameos. As I said, they literally lived in a world full of evil spirits. Rav Yechiya Qafiḥ, as a follower of the medieval philosophical tradition, saw all this as a distortion of true Judaism, and he saw it as nonsense. And he was not tolerant of popular beliefs. We're going to see a difference in him and his grandson. He was not. Now, we can't appreciate today, or it's hard to appreciate the courage it took. There was no one else doing this. This is sui generis. He himself alone gets up and announces that everything you all are doing, including what he used to do, this is all nonsense, and we have to get rid of it.
One day to the next?
Well, I'm sure it's not one day to the next.
Yeah, but what he used to,
yeah, because he was part of it. He was a big scholar in the Kabbalah and would do all the different things as well. He was attempting to undermine the deeply ingrained beliefs of the people, and not surprisingly, there was a backlash, especially for another big point he made. Now, soon Rav Yechiya was standing at the head of a real reformist movement, which is joined by a number of great scholars. What do I mean by reformist movements? Leaving aside reform like in Germany, the classic idea of reformist movement is to get back to the original truth before it was distorted. And what Rav Yechiya wanted to do, he said that we're heir to a great philosophical tradition of all these great figures, and that's what we want to return to, before Kabbalah had entered and become dominant. Now, the Kabbalistic dominance had led to what he regarded as the superstitions. It also led to new minhagim, changes in the siddur, and in general, the abandonment of the rationalistic outlook. And we'll see lots of examples of this.
And Marc, before you go further, you said a statement that I'm curious is 100% accurate. You said basically since the 17th, 18th century, and let's say today when a Yemenite Jew is going to tell you that we're the most traditional Jews since the Beis Hamikdash tradition or that and this, it's baloney what you say.
Of course it's baloney.
Because there's no tradition that they kept. Because this is the way that you said.
As everything has been influenced also by Kabbalah. What do? They might have in mind, their pronunciation might be the best.
Pronunciation.
They, no other group, for example, makes a difference being Dalit, and the Gemara says you're supposed to lengthen the Dalit.
I know they got influenced, but by saying such a big statement that there's no tradition that stayed by them.
Qafiḥ believes that their manuscripts are the best and everything, but again, this is from the medieval period. What stayed by them? They've been influenced by Shulchan Aruch. They probably had some in Hagim as well, but in terms of day in and day out, they're influenced by they follow the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. So,
but they had Hilchos Shchita, they had Old Hilchos Shchita.
yeah, they did things. So for instance, there's no such thing as in Yemen. You didn't have maros really, where there's a tradition. The women would know what to do, things like that. So things like that. But he set up a base medrash. He set up a base medrash where they trained the students to copy manuscripts, to be sofrim, to make the film cases, to make the ink, to make the parchment, shchita, nikor, everything. Think today how difficult it is for any of us even to make a pair of tzitzis. But everyone had to know everything there. And he also valued secular studies, although we put secular in quotes, because we're going to see soon what Rav Qafiḥ says about this. His major action, what he said up till now would have been controversial, but I don't think it would have led to the Chayrims or anything like that. What really was the most controversial was his public and absolute rejection, not just of Kabbalah, but of the Zohar, which was a canonical text. He saw it as a forged document which contains nothing less than Avodah Zarah. The spheros, the sexual imagery, all the things known to people who study Kabbalah, who interpret it in line with monotheism. He saw it as a divergence from true Judaism and a foreign import that must be uprooted. And he says, it's not what I'm saying, I'm telling you what the Rambam would say, or Sadia, etc., etc. And this is what created the great dispute in Yemen. Had he shown respect for the Kabbalah, but said it's not his own approach. Ainli Asek Benistar. That's the expression that you often find. I don't involve myself with it, and practically it has no relevance to my life. That would have been okay, but that's not what he said. He was arguing that the Kabbalists were distorting Judaism through their phony doctrines, and he was relying on the authority of the Rambam and all the other medieval philosophers. And the response to Rav Yechia was severe and caused a rift in the community. There's a lot we could speak about that, but I want to really speak about Yosef. But a whole movie was made about this. Rav Qafiḥ's granddaughter, she made a movie. You can see they put it into 10 parts on the internet. It became two separate communities, no different than we have today. Two separate communities and certain Hasidic groups. It led to the interference of the government. Now, it depends which side you go. But I trust the side of Rav Qafiḥ because they seem to be more honest in this, but the other side claims that Rav Qafiḥ's side, Yechia Qafiḥ, went to the government. But we know that Rav Yechia and his son, Rav David, that's Rav Qafiḥ's father, and others were thrown into jail. In fact, we're told that the illness that Rav David Qafiḥ, Rav Yosef's father, died from was due to the beatings he received in prison there. We know they went to the government because the government shut down this movement in a formal sense. They had to close the base medrash. I'll tell you even later another story. What happened. I'll get to it. One night when Rav Yechia was sleeping, he woke up, someone had set his house on fire. He got up, fortunately, in time to put out the fire and save his life. We've seen things like that. In fact, for some of the period, as I said, of this great dispute, he is still on the Beis Din with the great opponents of him. Eventually, the Kabbalistic scholars of Yemen, which were, the mainstream, although you had a number of Talmidei Chachamim who were in Rav Yechia Qafiḥ, he was able to convince them to join with him, which is amazing when you think about it. And then there were some who were they believed in the Kabbalah, but they also saw Rav Yechia as a great Gaon, and they didn't want to get involved in the dispute. Even though they personally were adherents of the Kabbalah, they saw him as being led by someone who's mistaken, but for good reasons. L'shem Shamayim, and they didn't see him as a heretic. That's Rav Kook, by the way. Rav Kook has a correspondence with Rav Yechia, trying to explain to him how wrong he is in the way he interprets the Kabbalah, but he relates to him very respectfully. So they got the Gedolim, I guess you would call that, in Eretz Yisrael, to condemn Rav Yichud Qafiḥ. And if you read the letters, it's in the book Emunos Hashem, you can see that some of them even refer to Rav Yichud Qafiḥ and his followers as no less than Kofrim, Apikorsim, because they deny the authenticity and holiness of the Zohar. In fact, someone I know wrote an article, some of you might even know it, me actually, so I don't have to be coy because maybe you don't know it, is there a chiyuv to believe in the authenticity of the Zohar? So I cite a number of these sources because, I mean, in what sense can there be a chiyuv to believe in? Is this now one of the Karim? But it did become canonical in that sense. Now Rav Yichya responded to these attacks with his own writings. I'll show you some of them in a minute. And this is how matters stood in Yemen. Two separate communities, even though officially he had to shut down his Beit Midrash, but that doesn't mean that he still had a movement there. Until this existed in Yemen, until the Great Aliyah, after the establishment of the State of Israel. Now the fact that you have all these Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael, when you go down the list, who they are, that doesn't affect the Jews of Yemen. And first of all, they never heard of them. They're living, Yemen is like in a different world, and they consider Yichya the Gadol Ador. So it's like in the medieval period. If the scholars of northern France put the Rambam in the Cherem, what do the people in southern France have to do with anything? What?
He was a minority in Yemen?
Yes, he was. The Dardanim were only in Sana, and they were a minority in Sana as well. By the way, the letter of Rav Kook, the correspondence between Rav Yichya and Rav Kook, was just translated into English by J.J. Kimchi and someone else. It's very interesting.
Was he white or dark?
What?
Was he from the white Jews or the dark Jews?
No, that's not in Yemen.
Yeah, sure, there's white Jews in the north, they're dark.
Okay, well, I don't know, he's in Sana, so it's I thought you meant like in India, you actually have Jews who are called the dark Jews.
Yeah, but even in you had that in
well, he was in Sana, so whatever they
You
were
have
in
a picture
Sana.
of him here. So.
Yeah. Rav Yichya's followers called themselves Dor Deah. They're a wise generation. And in the Arabic, in the dialect of Sana, this became Darda or Dardaim. By the way, there's an ancient sage in Malachim. If you remember, is it when Shlomo Melech is being compared? Yeah, it's Darda, but there's nothing to do with that. The followers of Qafiḥ, of Yichya, referred to his opponents as the Ikshim. The perverted, distorted ones. But they took the name, it seems. They didn't seem to... I shouldn't say that. I don't know if they took the name, but it's they themselves. We have plenty of examples. Look, you guys referred to us as misnagdim. That was a term of abuse, a negative term. And really, the Hasidim were more of the opponents of the standard order, but they liked the term and they took it. And the misnagdim were very happy with that term. And but I mean, you see the term ikshim being used by non-dardaim, but I don't know if any of the big rabbis would call themselves that. Now, since the establishment of the State of Israel, the Dardaim have been a sort of, I don't know, secret society, if you want to call it. I wouldn't say it's so secret, a little secret. And many of them, including the current leader, Rav Ratzon Arusi, he's a member of the Israeli Chief Rabbin. He's the Rav of Kiryat Ono, where my son-in-law's family comes from. They've moved away from Rav Yichya's unbending opposition to Kabbalah. They're more tolerant of Kabbalah. They're more along the lines of Ein Liyesek B'Nistar, but they don't attack it or anything. Now, Rav Yosef is 14 years old when his grandfather dies. His father had already died. He was raised by his grandfather. That was when things got really ugly, because his father and mother had died, and he was raised by his grandfather. And now his grandfather died, he's considered an orphan. The law in Yemen was that orphans had to be handed over to the government to be raised as Muslims. When his grandfather died, an informer, one of the Ikshim, told the government about this. And in order to prevent him from being seized and forcibly converted, the Dardaim married him off to his 11-year-old cousin, who, by the way, became an important person in her own right. They both won. They're the only two people to win the Pras Yisrael. He won it for his Torah scholarship, and she won it because she had a huge chesed organization she established. I think it was named Bracha, I think. A half year before.
What year is that?
What year? Well, he's born in 1917, so that would be 32. His grandfather died in 32, right afterwards, yeah. He, by the way, a half year before that, he had been accused and was almost put in prison. He was put in prison for a short time, but almost on a false accusation that he had dug up a grave of one of the Ikshim and set it on fire. The whole thing was a fraud. They went out there. He describes it. He wrote a memoir. His granddaughter published it. The judge, they all go out to look at it, and there's nothing there. It's in 1943 he emigrates to Eretz Yisrael. This is before the Great Emigration, but he came, and the route were from Sana to Aden, which was under British control then, and take a ship there. He comes to Eretz Yisrael, and where does he learn? He learns in Merkas Harav, which, and becomes very close to Ratzi Yehuda Kook and the Nazir. I mean, the Nazir is a Makubal par excellence, but Rav Qafiḥ, or Yosef Qafiḥ, never made the dispute personal. He first worked as a silversmith. And in later years, in fact, he was very important. He identified many of these things that came from Yemen. He could tell you how they are made, who made them. There's an article about his contributions in Yemenite art. He also wrote a volume, Halichos Teiman, about the practices of Jews in Yemen. The different minhagim, the superstitions, the folklore. And the fact that he was a silversmith is important to note, because in Yemen, the rabbis, they followed the Rambam's view. They all had professions other than rabbis.
So now you said in Yemen they did follow. So
well, about this was the tradition.
This.
Yeah, they worked. In 1950, he began to work as a dayan in Jerusalem, and in around 1970, he's appointed to the Supreme Rabbinic Court, the Beis Din HaGadol. But the Rambam in Hilchos Sanhedrin says that you go to a dayan, it's not a rabbi, you can't get paid. A dayan gets schar batola. So, when he was in Merkas Harav, he couldn't support himself, so I guess he diverged from the Rambam because he did take money from the yeshiva while he's learning, but later on he kept the note. He returned all the money. When he was a dayan and was making money, he returned all the money to Merkaz that they gave him as a student. You should know Rav Shelat never took money from Yeshivas Berkas Moshe for teaching Torah. Only he worked as a librarian there also. He took the money. So I know you could say, well, now they could pay him double as a librarian, so it's a legal fiction maybe. But the fact is, he didn't take. Yeah, it's also.
He had a job in Mekazana. By the Shidim, he would be the one to say. By the news of Shidim, he would say that this is wrong. Because of the Shidim, he would say that this is wrong.
Yeah, okay.
Based on the manuscript. It was an official job.
Official job. Okay, I didn't know that. But he says he gives back. Yes, he would go to the Nazir's house. Yes. The Rav Qafiḥ went so far as to say that he believes the Rambam had Ruach HaKodesh. So I don't know if he would ever knowingly violate the Rambam's words in a matter like this. Abraham Joshua Heschel has a famous essay on this. Did the Rambam have Ruach HaKodesh? There's a legend. This is a famous legend that when he was appointed to the Beis Din HaGadol, Rav Avad Yosef said, "We can't have you on the Beis Din unless you affirm the authenticity of the Zohar," and supposedly he did, but he denied this. He said it never happened. He never completely denied this. By the time he joined the Beis Din HaGadol, he's head of this group of followers of his grandfather Dar Daim, as was fitting. He's the greatest scholar in their camp, and he also has the lineage. And as I said, in all of his writings, he mentions his grandfather with the greatest respect. But he came to see that the opposition to Kabbalah was a lost cause. He never spoke publicly about it. He didn't answer my letter about it. I published this book. Some of you have probably seen it. Letters, 30 years, letters of correspondence with different Gedolim. There's a letter in here from Rav Qafiḥ to me. If we have time later, I'll tell you what it's about. Discount if anyone wants it afterwards. I can give it to you. But I wrote him another letter about the Kabbalah, about Zohar, and he never replied to that letter. Not only does he not refer to it, the dispute, in his commentary on the Mishnah Torah, I found a number of places where he mentions the Zohar. So he sees it as something to be cited, not authoritative in any way that they did in Yemen, but as a Jewish source.
Someone told me that he owned the Zohar with the Parashat Solomon.
Yes, he had, and he cites Zohar. A couple years before his death, had an interview when they asked him about Kabbalah. He says, if the Rambam's a Makubal, then I'm a Makubal. And if the Rambam is not a Makubal, then I'm not a Makubal. Now, despite not speaking publicly about the Kabbalah writing, anyone who reads his writings can know what he taught. And that's why he continues to be subject throughout his whole life to attacks from the Yikshim. A whole Kuntras is published against him, and Rabbi Ratzabi in Bnei Brak makes it a habit continuously to attack him even after he was nifter. I want to show you something though, which is amazing. Take a look at page 3 here, from his commentary in the Moreh Nevuchim. We'll speak about what he accomplished, but here's the chapter in the Moreh Nevuchim from volume 3, chapter 29, where he's speaking about Avraham and how he had to deal, Avram Avinu, and he had to deal with all the problems of the pagans and everything. And it says at the third line, he says, there's no doubt in Safek Etzli, Shehu Alav Hashem, that Avraham, when he disagreed with the views of everyone else, Hayu Makalim or Mavazim Oso, Mazalzim Bo Samatoim. So he says this is what they did to Avraham, the pagans, that they would attack him, etc. Look in the footnote. In Rabbeinu Amar Ezos Gam B'toch Nisayon Shninasa. The Rambam said this because he also was subject to the same thing. But then he says V'chein noagim, and this is also how people act. It means today. K'di'isa bet samach alafei. No one knows what that is, but you know what it is? It's this book, Sefer Emunas Hashem. This is the book published in Jerusalem in 1935, which is attacking, or 38. This records all the Chans, which is attacking his grandfather, Rav Yechikalach. He's comparing his grandfather to Avram Avinu, and the Mekubalim against him, he's comparing to the worshippers of Avodah Zarah in the days of Avram Avinu. And this is right here, but no one knows what this refers to. But it's right there if you just have to know to read it. Now,
It has a little bit of sarcasm, not only in this footnote.
yes, he's much sarcasm in the introductions and in notes. So you have to, he also writes in an esoteric fashion, just like the Rambam, but you have to be attuned to it. And here's an example where he hints to the, Hamaskil Yovin, that you'll know what this refers to. By the way, here is a title. I can send anyone this if you're interested. This is the page, Rav Qafiḥ himself in 1931, his response to the various chayrims against him. He sent it to Jerusalem where he had followers, and now, while Rav Qafiḥ didn't make Kabbalah an issue, he continued the path of the Dardaim publicly in other ways. So he would decide halacha based on the Rambam. Only the Rambam, except when there was an old Yemenite tradition against the Rambam. Then they followed the Yemenite tradition. When he was a Dayan, he's Dayan in the Beis Hagadol. So in his role as a Dayan, he also had to use the Shulchan Aruch. But for his community, it would only be the Rambam. You don't need to be a Yemenite if you join the community. For example, Professor Tzvi Langerman, great scholar of Judeo-Arabic literature, he was a follower. He was a member of the Kehillah. In fact, he went to the Moed Vugim Shirim for years and years. He told me that when he would ask Shailas, Rav Qafiḥ would decide just based on the Rambam, because Professor Langerman, I guess, is an honorary Yemenite. He has a student, also a big Talmid Chacham, Rav Aaron Qafiḥ, not related as far as I know, that Rav Qafiḥ was once asked, they were discussing what to do. Well, what's Minhag Yerushalayim? Rav Qafiḥ said, there's no Minhag Yerushalayim. There's only the Gemara and the Rambam. No, we don't follow. There's no Minhag Yerushalayim. He spoke, for instance, he spoke publicly about things that he didn't like. He spoke against the practice of what we do, exuberant dancing on Simchas Torah, that began to spread in the Yemenite community. He said that you have a Sefer Torah in your hands, you have to treat it with kavod and yira. Look on the next page. I marked it. He says, second column, second of the complete paragraphs. V'hinei makom iti. He says, I want to refer to the minhag garua, hamispashet, that's spreading in our community. Roktim k'maaseu b'chol. Ken maaseu gam b'yom gam b'Shabbos. And he says, afakicha sefer Torah, hechafetz yimale yado. He says, if someone wants the sefer Torah, that's from a pasuk in Malachim. Anyone can take the sefer Torah. And he talks about the marbim b'simcha, markidim sefer Torah, malo mata, yavo shamayim, yerdit omos. And he says, you contrast that to in Yemen. They would take a Sefer Torah, they would move a few steps, bend the knee, and that's it. But to dance, to hold up the Sefer Torah, running around like that we do, he says that's not how you treat a holy object. So here you see it. It's interesting. In fact, he has many interesting halakhic views. Don't have time to go into it because I want to move on to other areas. One of them, by the way, he held that if a fetus has some defect, you can have an abortion until the time that the fetus is viable. I mean, we know this shita from Tzitz Eliezer. It's famous. But Rav Qafiḥ held the same thing. In fact, there's one area that Rav Qafiḥ says he has in his parish. Well, first, this comes from his commentary on the Mishnah Torah. He wrote a commentary, 25 volumes, it's red volumes on the Mishnah Torah. The first half of it is really substantive. As he was getting older and he wanted to finish it, it just became a likut, and there's almost nothing original in it. But in the early volumes, you find a lot of his own comments and interpretations. I'll share some of them with you. Like, it's the Shabbos, this is money. So this is still part where you have a lot of originality. In his commentary on Hilchos Ishus, he says that it's unfortunate that the Jewish world doesn't hold like the Rambam in one area, namely forcing a man to divorce his wife if there's no reason for them to be together. We all know that the man has to do it willingly. Problem is, the man doesn't want to give it, so you can beat him, according to what Rambam says, because really he wants to do it. We just have to have him see the light. But we can't do it anymore. We don't accept that view, and even forget halacha, we don't accept it in the modern world. They don't allow that. And he says though that if the other Rishonim who disagree with the Rambam lived in our generation, they would agree with the Rambam because the modern situation has shown the wisdom of the Rambam. Today, if a woman is not going to get a get, she'll find a way to be with someone even without the get. It's asking too much to them. Very few of them are going to remain agunas for all that time. He's not talking about the frum. He's talking about the regular Jews. He says, therefore, halavai, that we all forget what the government says. Halavai, that the psak was like the Rambam's position. Now, in Yemen, they would force the Rambam. They would force the husband to give a get. There's ways to force him, as we've learned. Now, Rav Qafiḥ, he focuses a great deal on the Rambam, but not only on the Rambam, but his effort. Where do we see his efforts in the Rambam? Well, first of all, his first thing is his edition of the commentary on the Mishnah. When he published his new edition, translation, commentary on the Mishnah, at the beginning of the 60s, the first volumes were published in Arabic and Hebrew, and the ones you get today are just not in 6 volumes, but in 3 volumes, just Hebrew. That started a revolution in the study of the Rambam's Parish Mishnah. Until then, basically, the Rambam's Parish Mishnah, we knew it wasn't such a good translation. It wasn't taken that seriously. Once he published that, he started a whole revolution. I do have to say that there's a new translation, Frumer, whatever you want to call it, translation of the commentary on the Mishnah, but from my examination of it, it's plagiarized. Seriously plagiarized from Rav Qafiḥ's. The commentary on it, though, was very helpful. If you've seen it, it has a very good commentary on the commentary on the Mishnah, a super commentary. But the translation itself is by a Yemenite rabbi who did it, but it was not necessary. Now, he also published the Sefer Mitzvos. Sefer Mitzvos was translated. He translated from Arabic as well with his notes, halachic notes, notes on how you translate it. He translated, of course, the Moreh Nevuchim, the first modern translation. Now we have another translation. Two translations. We have Professor Schwartz did it, and a new one came out. Yeah, Yochai, exactly. So now you can compare them. But even, yes, exactly. But the fact is that still with the notes, Rav Qafiḥ's notes, they're very helpful. He published many articles on the Rambam. He published the letters of the Rambam. Very important. He also published works of Rav Sadia Gold, Rav Yehuda Levi, the Chovos Lavavos. He published Tshuvos of the Raiva. The Baalei Nefesh, the Tshuvos of his father-in-law, Avram Av Beistin. So enormous amount he published. It's unbelievable how much he was able to accomplish. The Rambam, I think, really was the first one to attempt to explain the Rambam and the Mishnah Torah by using the Rambam's own method of study and all of the Rambam's writings. Now, we all know about the Rambam. You open a Mishnah Torah, you have the commentaries there, but talk about explaining, first of all, the Rambam's approach, using the writings of the Gaonim, using all of the Rambam's other writings. We now have also the Yad Peshuta of Rabbi, who does that as well. But Rav Qafiḥ was the first one, and when you think about it, if you want to understand the Rambam's position, it's very relevant to what he says in the Parish of Mishnah, in his letters, in his Tshuvos. Rav Qafiḥ has notes on the Tshuvos. He was going to publish the Tshuvos. He started working on a translation, but then he heard Professor Blau, who was an expert in Arabic, was working on it. So what we have is actually, he made comments on it.
How did the Torah world accept his Targum on the Rambam? Do you know?
Well, the Brisker Rav held of it. In fact, he had some connection to the Brisker Rav. I don't know if he davened with it. Brisker Rav said you can only use his Parish of Mishnah. It's reported. But yes, it was accepted, I think, universally. But they didn't always cite it by name. So you have abbreviations. They don't want to give him kavod. So.
I remember I learned in Gateshead by Rabbi Gurewitz, and he's a Brisker Talmud.
Yeah.
And he used to give a shiur every day on Chovos Lavavos.
Yeah.
And he used to give the shiur in Qafiḥ. I asked him once.
Yeah.
He told me that the Brisker Rav used to say that this is the best targum.
Yes. So and by the way, the previous Sefer Mitzvos was done from the Arabic was done by Rav Chaim Heller, and I think it's Chavetz Chaim or Chaim Oz, or one of them said that you can only now use this edition of the Sefer Mitzvos. You can't use the others because as Rav Qafiḥ says, the translators, it's particular, so they weren't often expert, let's say, in halachic matters or in the philosophical matters. Although when it comes to Ibn Tibon, that's a strong statement. It's one thing about other translators, but to say about Ibn Tibon, who the Rambam was masking to say that he didn't understand things, so that he makes it seem as if the Rambam was just trying to be nice to him because he's making an
It was the
effort.
best he got.
Yeah, that's what he says. But the Rambam, that's not the sense you get. But so I'll get back to some of his maybe weaknesses.
That he didn't use it.
He didn't use it.
Or the Perish HaMishnah, or the...
I'm almost sure.
Okay, but if he didn't use it, it's a thing.
Chaim held that he was a Bekoyer.
That plagiarized version that you didn't name,
Yeah.
didn't that come out precisely because Haredim didn't want to
Yes.
accept?
Yes, yes,
Which
yeah.
means he's not accepted.
Well, but I
didn't say he was accepted.
but
I didn't say he was
until
accepted.
then, everyone used it.
The way that the
But they didn't say that they used it.
That's
So
what I
they'd
didn't
rather use
say.
a plagiarized version because they don't want to
Exactly,
use
exactly,
it.
The way
exactly. They
that the
used
Roman
it.
Beros used to say is a good Matargum. He didn't say he's accepted.
So it's like,
Yeah.
what's the name of
Jastrow.
Reb Shol Lieberman?
Yeah, okay.
They use it, but they didn't say it.
Yeah.
No,
so
he's
they-
way more accepted than himself.
But he's not. I mean, remember, he was on the base to Gadol. He was, but in the and then the Brisker Rav said you have to use. So, but there are people they would feel they have to use it because. But if we had a better translation or different one or more, then we wouldn't use it. But you need to because this is look, at the end of the day, Ibn Tibon. If you know Ibn Tibon's philosophical views, he's hardly kosher, and no one knows that. But no one knows his views. But that's
The basic master of Koch Sefer Mitzvahs is Rav Qafiḥ's translation?
yes.
Okay.
But they also published Chaim Heller's. But
No, I know.
Yeah,
I know,
yeah.
but the
That's
basic one,
yes,
the
yes,
Chevelle with
yes,
the
exactly. Yeah. Now, Rav Qafiḥ wasn't just a scholar of the Rambam; he also was a real Maimonidean. Now, how was this Maimonideanism seen? Well, first of all, his writings are full of negative comments about all sorts of superstitions, including astrology. We also know from the time he was young, he was interested in all sorts of matters, including science. He has an article. They published his 3 volumes, collected essays, and incidentally, I found 3 halachic articles of his which are not included, which I sent to the people in Israel, so they're going to publish it. They appeared in Kol Torah in like 1951. But he has an article called Secular Studies in the Rambam, Limudei Chol, but in quotes, Limudei Chol. He explains, according to the Rambam, which is his view as well, not only is science not secular, it is holy. In fact, it's Kodesh Kodashim. Remember, we're obligated to love God. You have to love God. It's a mitzvah. How can you love God? We don't know God. God is beyond us. What we can do, it's an intellectual love of God. He said we can know about God as much as we possibly can. How do we know that? His natures are knowable. We can look at his actions. The heavens declare his glories. Look what the Rambam says in Yesodei Torah. By the way, the first 4 chapters of Yesodei Torah are dealing with like science and philosophy. But what it says here, look in the days. V'heyachia derech alavos of your soul. B'shashis bonin adam masav uvrof anifol magdolim. V'yira mehen chachmaso she'en le'erech lokates miyadu over mishbeach lefer misav v'tayv v'gadol le'dah shem ha'gadol. You look at the human eye and what it is, and you look at the galaxies and the smallest insects and how everything. You're brought into amazement. The pasuk says, the heavens declare his glory. You only know that, you can only fulfill this mitzvah of Avas Hashem if you know God, and you only can do that if you study science. And he believes philosophy also, because philosophy was very much tied to science. But how else can you understand these things? How else can you be brought into wondering? So it's not secular. This is Kodesh Kodashim, and if you recall, the first 4 chapters of Yesodei Torah do precisely this. So, and it's obligatory also to learn logic and astronomy, biology, zoology, physics, medicine. The Rambam, he points out that the sages describe Avraham. How did Avraham come to recognize as one God? Because it was observation of astronomy. Rav Qafiḥ in his writings presents us with an intellectual Judaism, not a Judaism for the masses. It's a religion of the intellect. Therefore, a great focus must be on issues of theology. Even the 13 principles for him must be held as convictions with understanding, not recited as a catechism. And that's the letter. The term that the Rambam uses, in fact, he uses at the beginning of the Moreh Nevuchim, is an Arabic term, not Moreh Nevuchim, Sefer Mitzvos, itakad. And it's parallel to the Mishnah Torah, mitzvah leda. But Rav Qafiḥ himself, where the term itakad appears in the Yesodos, the 13 principles, sometimes he translates it there hamin. And I said to him, why you shouldn't, based on what you said, it has to be laid down. He writes back to me that you're right, I made a mistake, and here is how it should be corrected. To reach the level of conviction, to understand, not just to believe. Belief just on simple faith is not good enough. You have to understand. You need philosophy and science. How can you understand the existence of God? How can you understand principles? And that explains why Rav Qafiḥ translated and annotated all these philosophic works written in Judeo-Arabic. And he's following the path of his grandfather, resurrecting the old tradition, which is an intellectual Maimonidean type of Judaism.
What type of Maimonidean was he? Like Itibon or like?
Well,
the
we'll see.
Meiri?
No, we'll see. More at the Meiri. It's an elitist Judaism because the masses are allowed to continue in their mistaken path. The elite that knows the truth can follow Judaism, purge the superstitions. Unlike his grandfather, he did not see the need to crusade for his views or even to publicize them for the larger society. In fact, like the Rambam, I said he writes in an esoteric fashion. He was speaking to his followers. I think he's more Maimonidean than his grandfather, Mori Yichya, because the Rambam was prepared to allow superstitions as long as they didn't cross the line into idolatry or denial of God. So, for example, look at the next page. Famous Mishnah Torah. The Rambam says that there's a common practice to write the God's name Shaddai on the outside of the mezuzah. Now, as far as the Rambam is concerned, this is nonsensical, but he says as long as you do it on the outside, it's not a problem. They can do it. It's when they write it on the inside, holy names, etc., then that's no good, and they have no chiluk and all about because they're turning a mitzvah into a kameya. But he's willing to tolerate them doing it on the outside. The Rambam says that if the masses want to believe angels have a physical form, that's okay. In other words, there are certain things that the Rambam is allowing. He's an overt elitist. He says often that that this is for the intellectuals, the people who've filled their bellies, let's say, with other things. The masses, as long as it doesn't affect Ikari Amuna for him, they can go on believing in whatever superstitions they want. They can wear their red ribbons and do their shlisal challah and all these things, and it's okay but when it starts getting involved with Ikari Amuna, then you have to uproot them. In fact, that's why one interpretation of what the whole 13 principles is all about. What do you need 13 principles? Was this makes sure that everyone will have certain basic ideas and you have certain basic truths and. Is if you believe falsehoods, other things, that's okay. People, not everyone's going to be able to know everything.
But the Rambam says, when he talks about Yedoni and everything, he says that it's dangerous to believe things that are false, and that's literally why he says these mitzvahs were given. So Haktanim, Vanoshim, and these people shouldn't go astray and start believing in other things.
Depends on what. They come
Depends on what. If it's Avodah Zarah is one thing.
But he's not talking about Avodah Zarah, he's talking about magic.
No, but that's part of Avodah Zarah.
But he doesn't say that it's Avodah Zarah.
But that's part of Avodah Zarah for magic. It's connected to it, And look, and he would like people to be better, but you don't.
The Rambam is also very extreme in this because the Rambam thinks that thinking about Akshama, he doesn't allow even for Ketanim.
Yes, exactly.
So that's
exactly.
By
the way, Mori Yichya though wanted to spread his ideas even among the masses. He was a crusader for this. But when it comes to the Zohar, for that he says that this is Avodah Zarah. So he says that's why we have to spread it. Now, like I said, even though Rav Yosef Qafiḥ was not a crusader for his ideas, he still spoke about it. He wrote about it to his followers. In one of his essays, he talks about going to a cemetery. He speaks about the practice of going to cemeteries and reciting Tehillim there. The Rambam says that you don't go to cemeteries, and that when you go there, you remain quiet. The only thing you say at the cemetery has to do with the mace. According to the Rambam, you're not allowed to involve yourself in Divrei Torah at the cemetery, and Rav Qafiḥ says reciting Tehillim falls into this category. Obviously, this viewpoint is at odds with the common notion that a cemetery is a place of kedusha, of holiness. You go there to daven. Rav Qafiḥ says cemetery is a place of tumah. We don't go there for holiness.
But this is already in Chazal, Yerushalmi, Bab. It's not so kosher, this type of view.
I understand, but he's following.
We see Chazal by Etanis, you go out to the Meisim.
Yes, so you have to see why do you go there? Do you go there to connect to the mace, or do you go there to reflect on yourself?
There's two diets of Chazal, and the Rambam took one position.
Yes, and the Qafiḥ follows him. The Rambam says in the letter in astrology, I don't have to answer for every Maimar Chazal, because the truth could have been hidden from them. So obviously you can find something for almost everything.
I'm just stating the other opinion.
Yes, we know there's another opinion.
Yeah.
In fact, the other opinion is the Rove. On my trip to Morocco, of course, they go to the cemetery is a very important place. In fact, in Morocco, you had it's almost like a praying. They had a kesher to the tzaddik, the dead tzaddik. You made a kesher with a certain dead tzaddik, and he took care of you. He watched over you like Reb Shiloh or something. And but sort of Qafiḥ sees this as something which is, but he's focusing on the fact that we don't learn in the cemetery. You know, Briskers didn't go to the cemeteries because of what the Rambam said. So many people do something special, of course, on a yurt site. That's pretty standard. Rav Qafiḥ said when he was asked, "What do you do on a yurt site?" By the way, the word yurt site is interesting. I saw in the book you mentioned. He quotes a lot of these Yemenites. They don't know what the word yurt site means. They try to come up with all these etymologies, Hebrew. But so Rav Qafiḥ said, "We do what the Rambam did on a yurt site." So he was asked, but the Rambam doesn't say to do anything. So the Rav Qafiḥ says, "That's exactly what the Yemenites do on a yurt site, nothing." And the questioner said, "So you mean someone who's dead is completely dead?" And the Rav Qafiḥ said, "Yes, completely dead." In other words, when someone is dead, there's no longer a connection between us and this person. He's dead. Popular religion believes you can connect to the dead. Aliyah's neshama. Neshama should have an aliyah. We know the expression, Hareini kaparos mishkavo. May I be an atonement for the dead. Anything negative that will come to the deceased, come to me. Rav Qafiḥ sees this all as superstition. When you die, that's where you are, and that's what you're judged by what you did. No one else can help you. You have to face the Ribbon Shalom the way you are. Yeah.
But isn't like the last sentence a contradiction to what you said before? If they exist and they get punished and they're around, why can I not have a connection to them?
No, because they're a different world. We're not. I mean, the whole idea is that we can connect to them. The soul can't be raised up after death. It's not on account of what things that people do on earth. This is quite apart from the issue of praying to the dead. I mean, Rav Qafiḥ says, he says, interesting, what possible purpose is reciting Tehillim at the dead? What's the point of going to a grave unless you see the dead as some sort of intermediary? But this is superstition or worse, according to him. And he says internal contradiction. On the other one hand, people are praying for Aliyah's HaNeshama, but on the other, they ask the dead to intervene. So which is it? Is the dead powerful? He can intervene for us, or we have to help them out? By the way, he says he would never say about the dead, Zechuso Yagen Aleinu. That's a common thing. Zechus Yagen Aleinu. We mean Zechuso. His Zechus should help us? No. What does he say? Zechus Limud Toraso Yagen Aleinu. The Zechus of learning his Torah, that's ours. But we can be saved because of this dead tzaddik. What does one thing have to do with the other?
Is there such a thing?
No. Schus avos for him is just that you're inspired by your grandfather's great tzaddik, and he kept you on the right path and everything. Not that you're not in this world or in the next world. Now, yes, you can find plenty of sources that say otherwise, but this is his form.
And it's not like this. Schus avos means the brisa, the God, the chef gave us. But
the Torah gives.
Okay, but not that you're being protected by them or things like that. Now, obviously, for all these things, Rav Qafiḥ knew that there were different approaches, clearly. But this is his approach, the Ram Maimonidean approach. He was given an honorary doctorate at Bar-Ilan University, and during his speech, it's amazing. He rebuked the organizers because on the invitation to the event, there's a Hamsa picture, which is a Yemenite symbol, and he says, the Hamsa protects the evil eye.
Why did they do it?
Well, because they figured he's a Yemenite, the person who did it. So, the people in these offices don't always know. I was at a conference years ago honoring Professor Mordechai Breuer. It was a conference in his honor. I was invited to speak about German Orthodoxy. We had a whole big day where everyone came, and his family came, and the president of the university spoke. And as the president of the university is speaking, within 1 minute we realized the president of the university is speaking about the greatness of Rabbi Mordechai Breuer, the Bible scholar who had passed away very recently also. The person in the office who prepared it, they said Mordechai Breuer, so we're all sitting there, he's giving a speech, and it's like unbelievable. He's giving the wrong Mordechai Breuer. So someone in the office who sent it out thought it would be nice to put a Hamsa on, without even knowing. Hamsa's for the evil eye, and he says this is a disgrace. There's a common practice of changing your name when you're seriously ill. We all know that, right? You give someone a different name. And traditionally it's understood as a way of fooling the Malach HaMoves. And Rav Qafiḥ said, are you fooling God by changing your name? What does the Rambam say? You change your name as a way of tshuva. To say, I'm a new person now, we're going to start afresh. Not to change your name when you're ill or anything. So
Malach HaMoves made a mistake with a name, that's in Gemara.
It's what he's
Kannst
saying.
treffen man sagt Gemurre.
No, I'm just saying these things like it's a Gemara. The Gemara is
Obviously, listen, we have a
Kannst treffen in Bruches, als de meisten reden, eine mit der andere auch.
we have hundreds of years of practices. You know there are Makoros. If not in the Gemara, in Rishonim.
But he's following the Rambam.
But we're following the Rambam. That's the whole thing, and you can't have them both. You know? And if you follow that, then you're not following the Rambam. He's following the Rambam. And as I'll conclude in the end soon, I mean, this gives you, Shivin Panim. This is not everyone's going to like that approach. In his commentary on the Mishnah, Mikvos, the Rambam, the Rambam says there, one who is tovel twice is Maguna. He says, not like those people today who told himself many times, like they're the reincarnation of Naaman, who cures leprosy, dipped himself 7 times. Now, this is a sharp comment about people who go to mikvah, constantly go to mikvah and everything. You get this, you go to mikvah when you're supposed to. You don't just. By the way, I heard briskers also, right? They're not into this. Is that true? Let me. Okay. He also opposed, and he has an essay on this, although in his early years he didn't, because we have letters where he writes Bet Hey on top of it. But by the time he wrote this essay, he concludes that it's a mistake. You should not put Bet Hey on top of any letter. Be'ezras Hashem, he says if the letter relates to mitzvos and exalted things, God has nothing to do with it. It's your free will. And if you wrote Lashon Hara or something improper in the letter, well, you're going to say Be'ezras Hashem, God's going to help you write Lashon Hara. So now it wasn't only with regard to rationalism.
That's the Rambam starts to say. That's B'Shem Hashem. Like
That's not Be'ezras Hashem.
That's not
Well, the idea is he's starting B'Shem Hashem.
No, that's not Be'ezras
B'Shem Hashem
Hashem Hashem El Alam.
Okay.
First of all, this is an Arabic way. There's nothing to do with Yiddishkeit. This is the way that Bismillah El Allah. This is how the Arabic started.
But today we say Be'ezras Hashem. So what do you mean Be'ezras Hashem?
Right.
It wasn't only with regard to rationalism that he didn't always publicize his view. For example, he opposed Qafiḥ, which had become popular in Eretz Yisrael. He didn't want to publicize it because it's popular. He never takes issue with the Chazon Ish directly in print, or with the Maritz, because he said this would simply bring controversy. So he'll tell you his view, but he's not going to write it down. We also.
What is that person in Chazon Ish?
I don't know.
It's more than any other god.
Well, the Chazon Ish, because he became, For the
why you mentioned Chazon Ish? He didn't have any prayers. What do you mean? The Chazon Ish has Kamatri the Rambam. Why doesn't he?
I understand. But he wouldn't publicly a psak of the Chazon Ish. He doesn't go against publicly. We further see his views in his various introductions. If you want to get a sense of him, you check out his various introductions to various books, and also his commentary. In his commentary on Nazir 2:1, there's an argument to the Tanakh and Rav Yehuda about the view of Beis Shammai, and the Rambam on the spot says that since Beis Shammai's view is rejected, we don't need to understand its logic, its ramifications. In other words, we don't accept Beis Shammai, so we don't need to explain it. So after quoting this passage, what does Qafiḥ say? In our days, they would angrily reject this approach. They would call it Amaratzus. And the Miyushavim, which I assume means those in yeshivas, it's a simple Melitza way of saying it, would call it balabaitiyut, like a balabus's approach. But our great rabbi, the Rambam, a different view. In other words, if we've obviously in the yeshiva world, in the brisker world, understanding the Ravad is just as important as understanding Rambam, the rejected view. It's all about the Lishma. But theoretical knowledge is what the wording is all about. But in my Madian tradition, Torah study is joined, as we'll see right now, to practical halacha. And therefore, you're wasting valuable time trying to understand the logic of a position that's rejected. Rav Qafiḥ pointed to the Rambam. What did the Rambam say? The Rambam says in one of his letters that the desired goal of the material in the Talmud has been destroyed and lost. In other words, the point of it was for practical study, or for practice. All the machlokas came about. That wasn't the intent, even though that's what we do as part of Torah study today. But that's because of mistakes and things like that. But it wasn't supposed to be like that. That's not the primary intention. The primary intention, the Rambam says, is what knowledge of what to do and what to avoid. And in another letter, the Rambam says, the best thing is devote yourself to the Mishnah Torah and the Rif. Only if there's disagreement do you need to go to the Talmud. And Dayanim, they need to know the sugyos because they have to decide halachas. But the average person, he doesn't need to know Gemara. Not to take away from your job.
He doesn't teach average
yes,
people.
in the introduction to Mishnah Torah, he says that, which I think he means obviously the Talmidei Chachamim, the big ones, who are in Sapsak, they need to know the Gemaras. But for the average person, Rabbi Yosef has Tshuva, says if you only have an hour a day to learn, you should learn halacha. Not Gemara, because halacha is nice. Of course, the thing is, halacha is dry though, and people would not be learning. The explosion of learning only happened because of learning, So the Rav Soloveitchik, when he writes about it, he understands what he's writing about. That's where you get in halachic man. That's really where learning is, but that's not what the Rambam says, and that's not what the Gaonim thought. For a Qafiḥ, and this relates to your point maybe, truth is the guide, not authorities. You can cite lots of authorities who say something, but if we're interested in truth, then, like I said, the Rambam himself says this in a letter on astrology, that even views, you can find views in support of astrology in Chazal. So, and he explains in 3 different ways why he doesn't feel a need to be bound to it. And Rav Qafiḥ says...
You mentioned before the Adamos that he wrote. Could you tell us a minute the way that Rav Qafiḥ is talking about the Rabbi, that it's the chutzpah, way that he talks about the Ravid and other Rishonim? There's no problem to talk about them in a way that no one else.
I think what you're referring to is only when he thinks that they're starting from certain assumptions. He says this, but the Mishnah also
says the Rabbi was a rich person.
Oh, well, no, I think that he's quoting. That's in the Seder Adoros. I think of Conforti says that. But he says he assumes that a lot of these commentators and people who disagree with the Rambam come from different perspectives, and they don't even understand what the Rambam is talking about. So rejection is not. But that's stated by Conforti. But he published the Rabbi. He respected the Rabbi. He published the Rabbi's works. He says that if your opinion is correct, you don't need to cite a lot of authorities. There were times, I have to say, however, that Rav Qafiḥ would have been advised to consider what other scholars have to say and not just assume he has all the truth, because he is without a doubt mistaken. For example, he is convinced, and nothing can change his mind, that the Rambam's letters to the sages of Bunel in southern France were forgeries. And that's not true. There's no question it's not true. I can show you all the reasons why it's not true. He just thought that it doesn't make sense, the Rambam's replies. In other words, he looks at the Rambam's replies and he says, it doesn't work, but we know it's true. It's mentioned by Narboni. It's okay. He also thought that the letter in astrology was forged. Not that the Rambam believed in astrology, no. But he thought, and we know these are correct letters, yeah.
No, but just generally speaking, the letters for the Rambam is considered, from what I know at least, to address politically a lot of issues, not only to the ultimate truth.
No, but these are tshuvos, not just the letters. These are tshuvos. The sages of Unel asked the Rambam shilas. Yeah. Contradictions in the Mishnah Torah, and the Rambam writes back. Sometimes he says there's a mistake in your text, correct it. Other times he says that I changed my mind, and the Reb Chaim Brisk, Professor Tversky recorded that the Rav said that Reb Chaim Brisk he didn't like the letters. Yeah. In fact, there's a famous case in Hilchos Niskei Mamon where the Kesef Mishnah mentions the Rambam retracting his view, but Reb Chaim explains the Rambam in accordance with the original way. Not.
Didn't he also think that Ma'amet Chesam Meisim is?
No, Ma'amet Chesam Meisim is authentic. He includes it in his letters in the Rambam. Rav Qafiḥ was a Tzioni, Rachmana litzlan, and he said there's no heter for Torah scholars not to go to the army. Absolutely not. Everyone. But I want you to read a letter with you now where you see he sounds like the Satan already. Amazing. Because in theory, he's a great Tzioni. But look at this. This letter is found in... there was a sefer by the Rav of Petach Tikva. His name is Ramosha Malka.
Also a figure,
Yeah, Moroccan figure. And he was in Petach Tikva. You guys are too young, most of you, to remember this, but there was a movie theater, I still remember, that was open Friday night. So the Ramosha Malka, the Sephardic chief rabbi, and the Ashkenaz chief rabbi, I think it was Bar Solomon, for about a year, every Friday night, they went and protested in front of the movie theater to have the movie theater shut down. But of course, it's a free country, so it wasn't. So after a year, Ramosha Malka says, we're not accomplishing anything. We've already given our rebuke. They're not listening. Once you rebuke someone, you don't need to keep rebuking them. And he says, we're causing Alachil Shabbos. When we go there, the television stations come out, the police come out, everyone has to. So he said to stop it. And he published the letters he received. Rav Yosef writes to him, no, you have to continue doing this. Continue your protests. You're making Kiddush Hashem. He cites the rabbis who wrote to him and said, you're good, you fulfilled your obligation. And then he has a letter from Rav Qafiḥ. And Rav Qafiḥ agrees with him. There's no more need for tochacha. And he says it's even asur, but then he says as follows. He says, second paragraph. The first paragraph where he just speaks about we're not doing anything by the protest. Listen to this. Kavod Rav. Anu chaim b'tkufa shel Shmad. We're living in a tkufa of Shmad. Tsar lilo umar tadvarim. It pains me to say it that Yad called Sarei Torah Yisrael Rama called Mitzvah Yisrael Nasa Rosh. If you want to succeed and get high, oppress the Torah. Osam Aruri Matilu Shikutzim B'chol Kochi Yisrael B'lo Kol Atzma L'Modas Rishusam. Eini Yodeim Haisa Kazos B'Yisrael. He said, I don't know if we've ever had something like this where they're so opposed to Torah. Af B'Shilton Isabel, Masalia, and these wicked queens. Anu Chayim B'Tkufas Redifa Nora. Eini Yodeim Haisa Me'olam Hashpal V'Vizu Et Torah Yisrael V'Nosei Digoa Qafiḥ Hi Kayom B'Medinas Yisrael. You can, if I showed you this letter and asked you who it is, you'd say it's someone in the Satmar, it's the
Because of the Yemenite Jews that were...
No, but he knows, but I mean, this is, he in theory, he believes that the state of Israel, in fact, he has a whole essay showing that this, the Gimel Shvuos, based on how the Rambam understands it as an allegory, it says nothing, there's no halakha about the Gimel Shvuos, the Rambam doesn't record it, the Satmar Rebbe thinks is totally wrong about the Gimel Shvuos, so in theory, he believes, of course, in the state. And but in seeing in practice what's happening,
I don't know, it's exactly how the Rambam would write. Saying the Rambam was also not a liberal, and the Rambam would, if he follows the Rambam, this is what it is to write, because the Rambam wouldn't be like a K with this kind of another. The Rambam is a very theistic when it comes to. The halacha needs to be.
I understand.
There's no way out. This is real Rambam.
Okay, but really the language is a little shocking because he's considered one of the religious Zionist figures. In fact, someone made for Sukkot. If any of you want to put something up, if any of you are not afraid, someone made for my classes a thing for the Sukkah you hang up with all the religious Zionist Gedolim. Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Kasher, Rav Gutmacher, Rav Sirius Kalisher, and Rav Qafiḥ, as I recall, is in it as well. So he is a Tzioni. But in practice,
the Rambam would also be in a certain way because he has no problem with having that we should take the salvation in our own hands, and the Gela should be tivit, and but the Rambam is very jealous that it needs to be the halachic approach.
Granted, but I still think it's a bit extreme, his language. In one area, he has a very strict approach. Halacha Maisa. He says that Yemenites cannot eat at restaurants in Eretz Yisrael because that's a special, and they don't do the chalita on meat. The Rambam holds that the kosher meat is not just enough for malicha. You have to place the meat in the boiling water. And I don't know how many Yemenites follow him, but the Dardaim do. Much like the Rambam, as I said, the Rav Qafiḥ wrote on two levels. I think all who examine his writings will agree there's an esoteric teaching. For example, the Rambam Rav Qafiḥ does not believe in demons, and he knows the Rambam doesn't believe in demons, but we have a letter of his. And he says that the Rambam doesn't pay attention to demons because they're not found among us anymore. That's... So what is he doing there? He's saying all the explosions, the cannons drove them away but we don't see them. But that's not really what he believes. He's writing to a person who maybe believes in demons, but he's saying, like the Kutzker said that, by the way, that sort of thing.
The Mishnah also explains the Rambam's position
this way. But Rav Qafiḥ really thinks there never were demons. It's not like we just don't have them. But what he's doing is he's making it into not a practical matter anymore. He's answering the question according to its level. By the way, he has a new explanation about Tchias HaMesim. This is based on a medieval Yemenite sage. According to Rav Qafiḥ, what is Tchias HaMesim? Normally we think of it's the person, the new person being raised with the same person. No, he says what it is. Once the nefesh is the intellect. Once you die, that's gone. That's in heaven, never to come down to earth again. The neshama is something else. We'll carefully in the Rambam, Mishnah, neshama and nefesh. The neshama is the life force. Tchias HaMesim, there will be a new body with a new neshama, the same body, let's say, new neshama, but it's not the nefesh. There's no connection between the person who's raised up, Tchias HaMesim, and the person up in heaven.
So what's the whole point then?
What's the point? The point is to show that's what the Rambam says, to show that God can do the most miracle, the greatest miracle. That's the reason.
I can find better miracles. What's the point?
It's in both his Kesavim and also in his Parish on the Mishnah Torah.
Oh, it's a Parish on the Mishnah
Yes. Now here is something else I found of interest. It says, what does it say? The duty of lighting. What does the Yerushalmi say? Why do women light Shabbos candles? Because they put out the light of the world, right? Rashi in Gemara, he cites that, but he also gives another reason which either was a tradition, it seems to be citing from Midrash Shabbat, it's not Midrash Shabbat, that the woman is found in the house. But the Rambam doesn't know he doesn't know that, the Rashi, he just knows the Midrash. I want you to turn to the next page, where he cites it from the Midrash Shabbat, not from the Yerushalmi, but the Rambam would be citing it from the Yerushalmi, where, so what does the Rambam give the reason? Why the Rambam says that the women light the Shabbos candles. Why? Because they're oskos b'lachas habayis. They're mitzuim b'bayis. That's why they light it. If you look down, did I mark it? Okay, if you go down maybe 6 lines to the bottom. V'Rabbeinu hevi rakatam etziosi shebesof Rashi. The Rambam just brought the same explanation, or the practical explanation, which I don't know if it's found in I don't know if it's found in a rabbinic source or this was a tradition, because it'd be strange that Rashi and the Rambam give the same practical source, which is not found in any rabbinic sources. Okay, Hisalim b'chol rosh midrash. Why? Behetem u'shitaso shekol osla teir sha'adam v'chava nachash b'zreishi space hu munachim al gorim v'lo chava ha'isha tivi si shegarma misas adam. Okay, what he's saying as follows is, the Rambam thought that the whole story of Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, is a mashal. There's no actual woman named Chava who caused the death of an actual man named Adam, and therefore he's not going to give the reason why the woman lights it because Chava killed Adam, and therefore she has to like the woman has to repent. The whole thing is not an actual story; it's an allegory. That's quite interesting. It's right here in his commentary.
Allegories used to explain real phenomena. That's
yes.
the purpose of an allegory.
Yes, but if you ask most people, traditional people, they'd say, of course there's not a Chava. They're real people, actual people.
But to say that allegories are not, allegorical stories are not Machayev real life is
I see what you're saying. They're saying, but no, because the reason that they're giving, let's say in Yerushalmi, is it's not because of an allegory. The story is that Chava did it. The understanding is she actually did it, and therefore today the woman's doing it like in a sort of like a tshuva.
Does it matter if it's an allegory?
It doesn't. I would say it doesn't. It doesn't matter. Just like if you say that every day is not days of creation, not 24 hours, but eons. It doesn't affect like Shabbos.
No,
I would say
exactly,
that, but a lot of people would disagree, and they would say no. It's the whole idea of Shabbos. The 7th day. It's the 24-hour period. The Rav Qafiḥ thinks it's significant that if it's not a real woman, we don't require women to do it because of an allegory. But I could see your point that what's the difference whether it happened or not? The Torah tells the story, so therefore we assume
he's not believing in the allegory. That's what I'm saying. He's basically talking about
seems
himself.
Like
he doesn't believe the story.
There's nothing that happened.
That's exactly what it is. But you can also have a tikkun because the story is telling us for a reason. Even if there wasn't an actual event, it's as if there was an event and it tells us something about women that they need a tikkun. You could read it that way, but he doesn't.
Wait a minute, you could say that in the Rambam's philosophy, a woman symbolized the chimrius, not the chomer. And that's why the chomer is the one that
Okay, you could. Okay, but I just think it's interesting. I want to finish because we're getting close. He shows you his scientific knowledge and his awareness in other areas as well. For example, in his commentary on Rambam Milchas Shabbos, he says that you know why you can kill lice on Shabbos? Because it comes from the sweat and other insects. They're spontaneously generated. The Rambam, so Rav Qafiḥ says, the Rambam himself had trouble with this. He says he doesn't understand how this is possible, but so many people have attested to this. Rav Qafiḥ says that today we know it's not true. This is the super that goes to Pachad Yitzchak there, where he's talking about it. He says, Ra'oi not to kill it on Shabbos. He doesn't go so far as saying it's usher. Because look, the Rambam says it's mutter. So but he says, Ra'oi not to kill it, because now we understand something the Rambam didn't understand.
But the Rambam himself in Sefer HaMitzvahs says the opposite. He says, people that claim that something cannot come only from a female just don't know science.
Exactly.
So the Rambam is actually like very strong.
No, but he also says, he says that I don't understand it, but he says so many people have testified to seeing it.
He says because they don't understand science.
Yes,
that's what he says
but elsewhere, but his Parish Mishnah, I think it's Parish Mishnah, he says that it's hard to understand, but so many people have testified to it that I accept it. And then he accepted the scientists who said it. This is a scientific belief. Now we know differently.
I know.
So
the Rambam claims that scientifically he understands.
Of course, Qafiḥ says the Rambam's wrong. We're going to see another example.
Yeah, okay.
This is very important, by the way.
Doesn't understand that he accepts it.
Rambam fights for this position. He says that only people that don't understand science
Yes,
will
he
hold the
does. He
opposite.
does because it's been testified. He was convinced of the truth of the people who testified to it. He had a negative. By the way, he had other views that you might find interesting. He had a negative view of Bas Mitzvah. He has a tshuva about this or letter. You know, he cites in opposition not just from Moshe Feinstein, Deborah Tziner Rav, and Shuvas Be'er Moshe. His form of Judaism is not an easy form of Judaism. It's easier to go along with, of course, what everyone else is doing. But that's not the way of the follower of the Rambam. The Rambam has truth as his guide, not conventions. According to the Rambam, if 10 great rabbis say one thing, and another rabbi says something else, if the other rabbi is correct, then he's in the majority. And he has this approach from early on. He has a book they published after his death called Sichat Kalim, written when he was 17 years old. It's they found it among his papers, which he discusses Shadal and Kabul. He writes that he says that what does Amunas Chacham mean? He says you attach yourself to the sages, right, and believe what they tell you. But then he says V'lo shetamina magamri. Don't. This gets to your question. Don't believe them entirely. In other words, if they tell you something nonsensical, don't accept it. If we know better now, we don't accept it. We follow the sages, but not entirely. That's why he says that says in Kinyan Torah. What does it say? Torah is acquired through Amunas Chachamim and Pilpul Talmidim. Why does it have to say Pilpul Talmidim? Just say Amunas Chachamim. Because a student can't just be a robot. Just because the Rebbe tells them, if the Rebbe tells them, yes, you have Amunas Chachamim, but you also Pilpul Talmidim. You have to investigate what your Rebbe said. It could be your Rebbe's wrong, and even the Rambam could make mistakes.
Anyways, Amunas doesn't mean believe in Chachamim. It means trusting them.
Trust, okay, that's what I was saying.
He says don't trust them.
Don't trust what they say, yeah. So with this approach, it's not an accident that the greatest follower of the Rambam in our time, Rav Qafiḥ, would sometimes show intellectual independence and disagree with the Rambam. So let me show you, go to the next page, the last page. The Rambam in Sefer Mada, Hilchos Torah, Perek Gimel, explains astronomy, all about the Galgalim and how the planets, the spheres, and all this. And Rav Qafiḥ points out that all the Metzios of the Galgalim, etc., we know it's nonsense. But then he says something very important, line 4. Kol advarim halal lo kibum chazal ish mipi ish. Ella, they didn't receive this by tradition. Only havanasam v'acharasam, either they on their own came to this, Heimat shehechan shegia Torah's astronomy is based upon the astronomy of their days, or they got it from the non-Jews. Now, why is this so important? He goes on and says, look, third line from the bottom. Why is it so important for him to mention this? Ki ra'isi Rabbi. I've seen many. Kigon, you know, Kufresh Mem stands for? Kiryas Melech. Kanievsky. What do? They're trying. They're trying to find proofs in the Gemara and Midrashim Zohar to what the Rambam says about astronomy. There's no need for any of this because he's getting it from science. But even more so, listen, very important. We know this all comes from the non-Jews. It's important to know this. We have a completely different understanding. Some things are totally accepted, like spontaneous generation, let's say, and now totally been abolished. If someone's going to think, if someone doesn't know the source and thinks Shemakoran, the Masoras Chazal, if you look at this Mishnah Torah and say, well, this is really coming from Chazal about the Galgalim and the sun revolving on the earth, you look at it and say, hey, wait a second, this is Torah Shabbat Peh. We know this is wrong. Well, then something that's really Torah Shabbat Peh, something that's really an Ikar, you'll throw everything out. If you're telling them that you have to believe that the sun revolves around the earth or any of these things, because that's Torah, basic Torah, and you can't believe that, well then, so the Rav Qafiḥ, it's very important to distinguish what is really Torah. You know, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky held that you shouldn't say a Birkas Torah if you're learning the Rambam science in the first 4 chapters of Sodei Torah. It's an amazing thing. And then he says,
but the Chazon Ish held that after it's written, the Rambam's Torah.
It has Torah, okay. And then the Rambam, and then when he goes further, he says, Tov Ladas Emes, it's good that we know the truth. If they're rejected, it's nothing. That nothing we've seen so far scientifically here has anything to do with our Amunah. So what about references in the Nevi'im and where the sun rising or things like that? You can explain it in accordance with the true science. So that's an amazing passage he puts out. So he can put in Chayim just like with Rabbi Slifkin. I also have to say that he's quoted by Yosef Tobi, who was a close friend of his and wrote a lot about him. The Rav Qafiḥ confessed to him that when it comes to Tamei HaMitzvos, he doesn't like the Rambam's views. That they're not geschmack. They don't really, they're the medieval views that they don't live on, that he much prefers the Yehuda Levi approach. The Tamei HaMitzvos, the Rambam are interesting. He never wrote that.
He likes the approach of Yehuda Levi?
Yehuda Levi approach, that the mitzvos are special in and of themselves. Not that, because of Avodah Zarah or this and that. It's not related to, he never wrote that. So you have to believe Toby that what he says.
Why wouldn't he write it?
I don't believe
What is he afraid of?
I don't know.
I don't believe it.
Disrespectful to the Rambam.
It can be.
Okay.
But he would have been more accepted in
it's
the
very, very anti.
Exactly.
It's not like he says. If he would say, I don't agree to it, I tell you what. If he would, I assume he said, I don't like the Rambam. He explains with an historic approach.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't like this historic approach, and he would have other talent to say, but not to say that he goes with Rida Levi, because Rida Levi is anti-Rambam.
He may as well go with Kabbalah.
It's possible. It's possible he told Toby what you said, and Toby, but he did. He said he quoted like Yehuda Levi at the mitzvahs in and of himself without historical reasons. The philosophy is
No, but that doesn't mean. That means that he finds reason that might not be it's not contrarily historical.
No,
I
understand. That's what Professor Twersky says. That even the Rambam, when it comes to Yad HaChazukah, he didn't repeat the stamen that he has in Moira, because the Moira is more the historical approach, and in the Rambam Yad HaChazukah intentionally didn't want to go with the historical approach, and he's trying to find Talmud is ahistoric. It doesn't not do with history. But to go say that you go to Rida Levi, the Rida Levi is anti-Maimonidean. It doesn't. It's like against the Maimonidean approach that the mitzvah comes to give a ta'elas for the person or for the world, and not some type of theurgy type of explanation. It can be that he should say.
It could be that at the end of his life he changed his mind. It could be.
So then you say like the Rambam end of his life, he saw Kabbalah and changed his life.
I mentioned it because it's interesting. Whenever these sorts of things are quoted from someone, you always have. Yes, I'll send it to you. As I said, the Judaism. When I speak on
You didn't finish the sentence. You always have.
No.
Whenever these things are quoted, you always have.
No. I meant to say when I speak at shuls, I always end by saying some vestments. When I speak where of Qafiḥ. That's where this talk, in much more limited form, began. I always say that the Judaism of Qafiḥ is not an easy Judaism, and I'm not here to say that people should adopt a lock, stock, and barrel. Obviously, there's different traditions, and Kabbalah is basic Judaism for us. But everyone should be aware of his importance and his contribution. And I'll also add that recent years have seen a proliferation of Jewish superstition to levels never seen before, at least in my community. I'm in a more modern Orthodox community. The sorts of, maybe you've seen this, but things that have migrated.
We don't know about it.
The superstitions, it's unbelievable. And there are newspaper ads in the modern Orthodox newspapers, various holy men who come to town who can read your forehead, read your palm. They got the iron,
they can't sell it.
The iron, the ore, they can do all these things. Who can give you special brachas for health and parnas, of course, after you make a proper donation, generous donation.
You
should know that Rav Kaduri, who was a real makubal, he never accepted money. He said any makubal who accepts money to help you, he's not a real makubal, because a real makubal doesn't take money for helping you.
But for voting for Shas, it did give money.
For those who are turned off by it, it's important to remember that there's another form of Judaism, I point out, that one that's has not evil eyes, amulets, holy men. It's a Judaism that focuses on the Torah, on Chazal, a Judaism that tells us that to obey the mitzvos, not because they're segulot or we're going to get anything from them, but because they're God's commands, and we're supposed to be an Eved Hashem. It's a Judaism that's centered on doing God's will, l'shma, rather than trying to figure out how God can serve us. I just saw in Kikar Shabbat today, Let's see if it's still on. Unbelievable, because I was thinking about that when I read it over this morning, and it quotes. I'll pull it up because you won't believe me. I have to read it to you. Because remember what I just said? It's we're supposed to serve God. God doesn't serve us. And I'll just mention this, and then you can. Rav Zilberstein was quoted in Kikar Shabbat. Yes, this is today's Kikar Shabbat. Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein b'havtacha chaseres takdim hakadosh baruch hu hofech liyos ha'eved shalom. That is, if you do the right thing, then hofech es ribon ha'olamim kivyochol ha'eved shalom ha'mechuyev hashiv lo tovat ha'tov asot.
Chazal say the eved lo eved ishmal. And the turns into be your malva.
Yeah,
that's what he's quoting from. That's what he's quoting from. But it's a. What can I tell
Somebody
you?
showed us some soifer today by the Shi, because we spoke about this, and this soifer says that Asa is a mitzvah. 1 second.
Okay, but the question is, what does that mean? For Qafiḥ knows the Gemara too. He's saying that this is like symbolic. You get reward.
We are not.
You get reward. You get reward.
We are not Rambam Mishnah.
Someone showed today some soifer. Some soifer
I think
says.
it might mean you get reward, but it's not the teasing.
Some soifer says that there's a chalik from the mitzvah is that the Torah says that you have to test Hashem and say, I give tzeduk, I want to see a return for it. You have to. That's the mitzvah. Then he repeats it again and again. Nobody should say different. This is the mitzvah. You have to give only to get rich. Some soifer.
Hashem's money.
Listen, I'll just end with this. This is obviously a different form of Judaism than what we have. It's unusual, and I think that with most forms of Judaism, everyone takes what they think is the good, don't takes the bad. I mean, it's hard to be a Rav Qafiḥ sort, but he does call us attention to the idea that, the idea of an Eved Hashem, it's not about what you get, the idea of superstition, how it can overpower. So some people's Judaism becomes a Judaism of superstition. It calls us, again, our attention to the fact that we have great Rishonim, medieval philosophers that were pretty much forgotten about for a long time. And they have what to say. And you can't imagine going to yeshiva and learning Gemara without learning the Rambam. Okay, so if you're learning the Rambam in Gemara, why, when it comes to Hashkafa, the Rambam is off limits? It's the same Rambam. I'm saying this is all Rav Qafiḥ's legacy. So even if you're not going to adopt him lock, stock, and barrel, and say it's very hard to, the fact is that he
we're all after Shana. We had the Simonim. We did everything like Rabbi said, and we're we're following the Gemara. We looked at the Rambam, but I'm saying the Rambam wanted
the Meiri says
the Meiri follows the Rambam in many areas on demons, on Zugot, and on. But there's also a living Judaism, and the living Judaism, it's
you have a relational God, not an abstract Aristotelian God.
Yes, all these things.
Happy with
I'll take some questions now.
For the question, we want to thank Professor Shapiro for coming here. It was a real schus and an honor to have you here, and we'll hope we'll see you again in Metz Hashem.
The honor is all mine. Believe me, I've spoken to many groups, but a chevra like this, other than last week, I've never had such an experience with such a large learned group, and to speak sitting next to now I know not just Ray Martin and Rav Gaon. As I said last week, you weren't here. Mati started sending me your Daf Yomi. I can't understand it. It's not the Mamash, but I can read it. I said it's unique that we weren't taped, so I'll say it now because we are taped. I don't think anywhere in the world you have a combination of alumnus and an academic Daf Yomi, so you should go.
Heilig academic.
Lots of hatzlacha in the new year.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll take a few questions before.
Just want to do the Rav Qafiḥ. I know you had an honorary PhD. Did you ever contribute to any other Judaic scholarly things outside of the Rambam and the Rab, the work that he did, the Rambam, because let's say, I don't know, he knows Arabic well. Did he speak? Well, did he contribute to Yiguritic?
No.
Any of those words?
He never had a university education, but he did know the Greek philosophers. He read them in Hebrew, so he knew all the Greek philosophers, and you'll see the references. he's self-taught in a lot of these
Well,
areas.
that's a biblical criticism.
No, he never dealt with any of those things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just philosophy, and everything academic is more philosophy. But you know, he wrote off halacha. He was a dayan. He wrote shuvos.
I'm sorry, go ahead. In general, like in the Mishnah Rambam, there's this idea of kimi v'kibli. There's nothing really binding as long as Klal Yisrael accepts it, right? That's the entire reason why we have to abide the law, right? Kimi v'kibli. You understand what I'm saying?
That happened a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but every generation can have a new kimi v'kibli if you have all of Klal Yisrael, right? So what is this Rav Qafiḥ's problem that the Jewish people have a new, like, as long as it's not idolatrous, that single idea is whatever minhagim you have.
You can't reject the Torah. You can't. The Klal Yisrael can't come
but
together.
you never reject Torah. You within the halacha, within the machlokes. You can always take new psukim and new because that's our right.
You're right. So, but the thing is, he sees.
It doesn't matter. We all make a new law that we accept.
He thinks the Rambam is the most important posek. So obviously, there's new halachas that are derived.
But the Rambam allows the structure to change law within his philosophy.
But you need to but to decide halacha, it's through the Rambam. It's through the Rambam that he's going to be the major person inside halacha. You're not going to reject the Rambam for him.
Yeah, but if you go and paskin like somebody else, within the Rambam structure, he left
Why would you
away.
want to do that? Why would you
It's done. It's too late. The Pandora is the back.
Rav Kook insinuates that in the letter to Rav Kappa's grandfather when he says,
he said all the problems are local.
Exactly. Yes.
Kook insinuates this in the letter to his grandfather.
That we've accepted a Kabbalah.
The fact is that
Yes.
and that on its own means, and he's using the language of the Rambam, that you have
Kimi
to accept
v'kibli,
it.
But if everyone wanted to come together,
That's how law works
if everyone
anyway.
wanted to come
Secular law
together
works
and
like this.
decide we're going to decide the rush, they
Yeah.
can do that. They're allowed
Drush
to.
wasn't the forgery.
But why should he do it? Why should
Because
we
it's
do
in
it?
Yemen, you're not allowed to change
So
that
we
was
don't-
something
we
that,
still hold the
according to
Rambam.
law, according to the theory of
Yeah.
law, whatever is precedent today, that is kimi v'kibli. It's the same as secular law, right? Now that's the way the Rambam approaches law altogether. So
But we're
what's
not
the
going to
big
change.
problem?
We're not going to change the
Okay,
Rambam.
let's
This
say
is
that.
this is our tradition. This is we go by the Rambam.
Our tradition changed de facto.
The
You
law
go
is
on
based
the
on the
street, pick
forgery.
Chazim Ahmed Abad.
But he doesn't think that the Shulchan Aruch can trump the Rambam. Or why should it? In theory, it could. It did for most.
It's
But why
not
should
making
it?
up new law. It's
Why
passing
should
like
it?
a riff here and like a...
I get, but why pass like the riff here and like the rush there when we have
Because
Rambam?
once we change, you need goy goy or a new, like a big tragedy to make another change. That's the whole idea of how law operates in law, in secular law, in
It's based on the
Rambam.
forgery. I don't think he believes it's a forgery. If he believes it's a forgery.
Doesn't matter what it's based on. No, it's
Of
not.
course, if the law is based on the forgery, the law changes immediately.
Kaimonish. That's not how law works.
Rabbi Qafiḥ respected the Nazir very much, even though Nazir is a Makubal, he respected the
The law is
and he was the Talmud of the Nazir.
Right, I understand. But Nazir was also a law.
Yes, he was the Talmud of the Nazir, Kuzari and other things. Yes. Okay, one final question, please.